Thank you very much indeed, Jonathan, and thank you also, as always, for organising this event. And welcome to all of you. It's really lovely to see you and to see a number of familiar faces as well as some new ones beginning to populate the screen. Do feel free to say hello to other participants if you want to use the chat facility. My name's Gully Francis Dehani, and I'm the Bishop of Chelmsford and the Church of England's lead bishop for housing. The title of this term's church housing event is Last Time Homes and Intergenerational Communities. And we'll be making the case that creating older people's housing in the context of intergenerational communities is both significant and timely as a response to the housing crisis as a whole. One common symptom of the crisis is the struggle that younger first-time buyers have to get on the housing ladder. Less obvious is the struggle that many last-time buyers have to find a suitable home, and yet the two are linked. We're currently building age-segregated developments. It's not intentional, but planners and developers typically focus on first-time homes and general needs housing, but they don't include age-appropriate last-time homes for older people. And when they do, they often put them in the wrong places, away from the heart of the community. And yet, we're living in a rapidly aging society where loneliness is rife. Nearly half of all people over 75 now live alone. One problem is that many older people remain in their large family homes even when they can't really manage them because they're frightened that the only other option is a care home. The consequence is that around 10 million private homes have 2 or more empty bedrooms. But what if positive, attractive alternatives were more commonplace? Ones which could enable older people to stay independent, but with help and support at hand when they needed it. Providing age-appropriate homes that older people want to live in can unlock much-needed capacity all the way down the housing ladder, including those first-time homes for younger households. And if those last-time homes were part of intergenerational communities where people of all ages could more easily interact and support each other, it would go a long way towards alleviating some of the loneliness which our aging population is facing. So tonight we have a fantastic set of speakers who are going to tell us more about these themes. But before I introduce them in turn, let me just say a brief prayer to begin with. And I'm going to use today's collect, the church's special prayer for today, and we are currently still in the Easter season. So let us pray. God, our Redeemer, you have delivered us from the power of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of your Son. Grant that as by his death he has recalled us to life, so by his continual presence in us he may raise us to eternal joy. Through Jesus Christ, your Son, our Lord, who is alive and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. So our first speaker is Lord Best, who has an unparalleled knowledge of Britain's housing system, having been director of the National Housing Federation and the Joseph Rowntree Housing Trust, where he pioneered one of the first integrated retirement communities in Britain. Richard's going to give us an overview of why we need more specialist housing for older people and the opportunity for creating intergenerational communities. Richard, thank you for being here. Over to you.
Gully, thank you so much. It's really great that we now have, within the House of Lords, we have a bishop for housing, Bishop Gully. We're so privileged. There's a voice there for the church for housing. It's a voice also within the church because we need to influence the hierarchy. We need to be influential in terms of what the church itself does. And Gully, you're there on our behalf, on the world of housing's behalf, doing terrific work. Thank you very much for all of that. I've expressed my view on other occasions that It is a welcome back to the Church of England into the heart of housing issues. The pedigree goes back to the almshouses of the Middle Ages and picks up with the Victorian era and Octavia Hill. And I'm very familiar with the 60s and 70s, the lots of church-sponsored housing associations where the Church of England was prominent. But you're back again now with a church housing initiative, and that's really fantastic. It's really important that you are there personally, Gully, but also that this initiative is going forward in the way that it is. So I've got to do two things. I've got to talk about the need for more housing designed for older people, and I've got to talk about the value of making developments of all kinds intergenerational. So, first of all, the need for more housing designed for older people. I worry that the government doesn't quite get it. There are several million older people whose housing is not suitable for their age and their circumstances. We have people in the private rented sector living in really awful conditions, very low quality, extortionate rents, I'm afraid, sometimes, but in need of rescuing for the last 10, 15, 20 years of their lives in that private rented sector, that part of it that is below par. There are people in the social housing sector who are in accommodation which, even if it's well managed by the council or a housing association, is not suitable anymore. It's on several floors. It has a garden that needs looking after. It's difficult to manage. It's inaccessible. Remember that the largest reason for people going into hospital is older people falling down stairs. Stairs and steps are hazards for those with any kind of mobility problem. And in the owner-occupied sector, there are hundreds of thousands of elderly people who own their own homes, but for whom that home is no longer the best place for them to be. And sometimes it's very isolating and separate. And Gully was talking about loneliness amongst older people. It's very much a sad place in older age. So older people need the same attention that everybody else does, rather more so, I would maintain. And yet we don't have programs of social housing targeting old people on any kind of scale. We are neglecting the needs of older people. Government policies understandably concentrate on young households, young families. Of course they do. There are 175,000 children in temporary accommodation, this ghastly private sector rented property, overpriced and very poor quality. 175,000 children sharing beds, no cooking facilities on the premises, absolute, totally unsuitable conditions, and government gives this the highest possible priority, and who can blame them? We're going to see 300,000 social rented properties through the affordable housing, the social and affordable housing programme, the £39 billion the government has set aside. Nearly all of that is going to be for families and younger people. Older people represent about 2.5% of all of the new homes that are built across the piece, private sector and social sector together. That's a very small number when you remember that 50,000 to 80,000 additional people over pension age move through that barrier every year, become pensioners, 50 to 80,000 a year. Government don't allocate funding at any kind of level that meets this kind of need. Social housing providers are leaving the sector rather than doing more. There is, of course, some excellent work being done. We're going to hear from one of the residents of Housing 21. It's a great organisation doing social housing and meeting very acute needs and doing it extremely well. But it's a tiny minority of the sector. When I was in charge of the National Housing Federation, it was 40% of all of the housing association output. 40%. It's now about 5%. And the private sector is doing very little. It's very often rather upmarket stuff. You've got to be quite well off to move into very nice places, very often retirement communities. But that doesn't cater for the squeezed middle, let alone for people on low incomes. And a lot of homeowners look to the private sector for their solution and they have very little capital behind them. So, how to get government to recognize that there are acute needs that need fulfilling among older people as well as those young people? And the answer is, I think, appealing to the dreaded Treasury, who counts the pennies and is always, and properly so, regarded as pretty mean with public funding. The arguments must be that it pays its way. If you house an older person, you're going to save money in terms of health, in terms of social care, and you're going to get a vacancy in the home that they move out of to move into the new accommodation. This is a serious gain to the taxpayer when you get two for one, when you have chains of lettings, chains of sales. Move somebody out of a council house into a bungalow, into a flat on the edge of the estate, perhaps taking the place where the old garages used to be. Nobody's been using those for years. That new development on the estate, housing elderly people from the three-bedroom council houses or the three-bedroom apartments, that's freeing up accommodation for people in temporary accommodation, yes, and other people on the waiting list. You're getting not just a better home for the elderly person living on that estate, something much more suitable, accessible, uh, manageable, companionable, and close to where they've been for years and years, but you're releasing a home that would cost nowadays 250,000 to 450,000 to reproduce, depending on the part of the country that you're in, at social rent. It's gold dust. It pays its way. Chains of lettings, chains of owner occupation. We've got to convince government that it's worth investing in older people's housing in just the same way as government is up for it. It's difficult, but it's up for it to invest in social housing for younger families, for all the other needs that exist. So I think what we need, and Bishop Gully is part of that, is a strong voice for elder people's housing, just as we've got strong voices, and so we should have for younger people's housing. And the second part of my talk is about intergenerational housing, because we looked at in the all-party parliamentary group on housing and care for older people. I'm the co-chair with Anna Dixon MP, a new Labour MP who's absolutely brilliant, and who works with me on this APPG. We had an inquiry into creating intergenerational communities. I came into it thinking this is a really nice add-on, that not we won't just be thinking about housing older people, but we're thinking about the mixing of age groups. What a nice concept. But it's much more than that. It really gives life and meaning to a community for the age groups to mix, for there to be young and old rubbing shoulders as neighbours. A Canadian colleague gave me a perfect example from Canada, which I took into this inquiry, which was that when the snows come, the path up to the front door gets cleared by a young neighbour for the elderly person. And in return, of course, that elderly person's doing all kinds of things for the young family, taking in deliveries, doing the occasional bit of babysitting. Neighbourliness expressed through snow, uh, something the older person was incapable of doing, but and was appreciative of, but which the having of an intergenerational community enabled to happen. So we looked at all of the new developments, these huge developments that Barrett's and Taylor Wimpey and the rest, the big house builders, are producing, and we noticed that that's family housing at scale, but it absolutely lacks any accommodation that is purpose-built specifically to meet the needs of older people. And it is becoming a segregated younger household community as soon as it's created, leaving behind. Time's up, says Jonathan. But just to say that in terms of housing for older people specifically, we have to make sure that that isn't itself segregated. And we saw wonderful examples, the Appleby Blue scheme in Southwark, where the community around is welcomed into the scheme, that it is a mixed community within the development. There's a wonderful cooking facility. They cook together, have cookery classes, mix and meet. But in terms of all of the special needs schemes for older people, the integrated retirement communities, the opportunity to bring the rest of the community in and be part of that interaction between generations. This is really worthwhile. And I came away thinking not just that we need more housing for older people, and we definitely do, but we need more intergenerational housing for older people. And that, Jonathan, is my time up, I fear.
Richard, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to listen to you. There's so much experience and expertise behind what you say, and you've painted such a vivid picture of what the situation is and indeed what's needed. So thank you again, and people will have an opportunity to engage with you more if they choose your breakout room. But if
Indeed.
you're in a parish and you're wondering what on earth you might be able to do in order to help with some of what Richard's been describing, well, our next guest might help with that. Reverend Dr. Karen Voth Harmon is vicar of St Andrew's, Cherry Hinton in Cambridge. I've known Karen for many years, and it's a real joy to see you again this evening, Karen. I know that you've dreamed of creating retirement communities since you were a student, and you're now working towards setting up an intergenerational community as part of a large new housing development in your parish, where you hope that retirement housing is going to be co-located with the Church of England primary school. So please tell us a little bit more about your vision and the journey so far.
Thanks, Guli. Um, well, if, like me, you regularly ask people, what should I preach on this week? What do people need to hear? 9 times out of 10, one word answer comes back, and that word is hope. People just are not feeling it these days, and perhaps for you, like me, the job of feeling hopeful and speaking hope into the situation feels quite heavy, a bit like trying to construct something similar to one of those Old Testament altars, which were visible signs of hope and witness to an encounter with God in a crisis. And they said to everyone who passed by, God is with you as you make your way home. The Coming Home report of 2021, with which many of you, I'm sure, are familiar, it reminded us that the Christian story does begin and end with people at home, with God, with nature, with one another, first in the garden, then in the New Jerusalem. And between these poles, we wander, searching for homes that reflect the shalom of our beginning and our end. And they do matter, our earthly homes, even if they're not our final destination. And anyone who's been bogged down in Exodus or Ezekiel will see that scripture contains entire construction and interior design manuals. And there's also a lot of additional detail in scripture about who should build and what and when and where. It's interesting to read Ezra, Nehemiah, and note that crucial mix of planners, prophets, politicians, and not local people, actually, who all have to align before the building can commence. As the Coming Home report concludes, there is a gospel to proclaim, at least in part, in bricks and in mortar. As a church which owns land and many sacred buildings, which exercises governance over almshouses, over schools, which has some serious investment money, the question before us in every generation, I think, is what, if anything, should we be building today? Where do our resources best align with the needs of the world as we find it now? On the edge of Cambridge in my parish, a group of us have been trying to envision this kind of gospel expressed in bricks and mortar, which would respond to three compelling challenges of our present moment: the crisis in housing, the crisis in social care, and the crisis in intergenerational relationships and the family. We want to build a sign of hope, which says that God can meet you even in the scariest part of your journey, that part where you grow old. So we have been looking at models of integrated retirement communities around the whole world. These are places which provide housing where people can age in place, surrounded by care teams on site, and at least some level of communal space and activity. And worldwide, churches are a big participant in this sector. They've often founded these very communities to provide for their clergy and their missionaries. Today, faith-based communities are very often the preferred choice in countries with a huge variety of options at different price points. And Britain, as we've heard, has a very similar need for different housing options for a rapidly increasing proportion of over 65s. Planners recognize this, but haven't yet, I think, found the right solution, because integrated retirement communities are actually quite expensive to develop, largely because they contain community space which cannot be sold. And those in the retirement housing business do not always come with a vision or plan for the creation of community. An industry insider told me that leading provider McCartney and Stone sort of stumbled into this sector because they realized that blocks of retirement flats had fewer legally required parking spaces than all-age housing did. And the image of later living housing here has suffered as a result. The percentage of UK over 65s in retirement communities lags far behind other comparable countries. 0.6 in Britain live in retirement housing compared to 14% in New Zealand. Retirement housing operators have struggled to shift the dial and persuade older people into community living. Despite lots and lots of research showing significant advantages to mental and physical health, time and time again we hear, even as they become very elderly, people saying, "Well, I don't want to live with old people." Well, we think that the Church of England has an ace up our sleeves, which could be game-changing in this landscape. We have a lot of primary schools, and we have opportunities to build more. So how about putting retirement communities next to primary schools or even on top of them when we're starting from scratch? And animating these communities through the contributions of local parish churches and on-site community chaplains. Sharing resources improves the bottom line because some of that expensive community space in both communities can be shared. The grounds, the hall, music, art, sport facilities. Remember that in primary schools, these are all left empty every day after 4, all weekend in the school holidays. The obligatory cafe within a retirement community could serve the school lunches, could take in extra income from children and families after school. And real ongoing intergenerational community could be fostered in so many creative ways as a deeply Christian vision serving the common good is worked out from the youngest to the oldest in our societies. This type of community could also financially support, potentially even house a chaplain and provide space for a worshiping community to gather. The local parish could benefit from a 2 or 3-way flow of volunteers between school, retirement community, and parish. The incumbent would gain a chaplaincy colleague. A new housing development would gain a significant, highly visible Christian presence and sign of hope. So we've been talking to many leaders within the industry about this model, and we find genuine excitement about partnering with the church to bring the vision to fruition. Obviously, our land is a big asset which we bring to the equation, but so is our ESG, our environmental, social, and governance contribution, alongside our brand and the marketing potential amongst congregations who already know something of the joys of intergenerational community. This is a vision of the gospel expressed in bricks and mortar, which has financial viability. It would begin to address the lack of suitable housing for an aging population, freeing up those family homes for families. It would ease the strain on social care, much easier, quicker, and cheaper to care for everyone when they are in one community with a consistent care team on site. And it would ease the loneliness of both old and young, offering support to children who are increasingly bereft of extended family. Widows and orphans, our ultimate test as Christians, as a society, is how we treat them. Job, as part of his eloquent defense in the Bible, says it all comes down to this. Chapter 29, when the ears of others heard me, Job says, when the eyes of others saw me, they commended and approved me, because I delivered the poor who cried, and the orphan who had no helper. The blessing of the dying came upon me, and I caused the widow's heart to sing with joy. Could we really build something that would help to deliver the poor and the orphan and cause the widow's heart to sing with joy? This is the kind of hope we're beginning to imagine and plan for the many new housing communities in the Ely Diocese. And if you'd like to get involved in solving the puzzle of how to bring these various pieces together, the education and planning authorities, legal experts, diocesan DBEs, housing associations, and retirement community operators, and of course developers, we'd love for you to be involved in the conversation. So do come along to the breakout group if you'd like to talk further.
Thank you very much indeed, Karen, for what I can well describe, I think, as a hope-filled contribution, a reminder that for Christians, at least, our efforts in the work around housing should and are rooted in theology and in scripture, with so many examples. And so thank you for the practical points that you've addressed, and they include both challenges, but also positive ways of addressing these. So we're now going to turn to our third contributor, Dan McPherson, who's also from Cambridge. Dan is head of later living at the consultancy firm TSA Riley. In his work, Dan helps landowners, developers, and retirement living operators create great communities. Dan's going to explain a little about what it takes to build, to plan and to build a retirement community, including steps that a church landowner, such as a diocese or the church commissioners, for example, would need to consider in order to get started. Dan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Guli. First and foremost, it's a privilege to be on this panel discussion. I will just check that you can see my shared screen with
Yes.
with the slide on. Perfect.
Okay.
I'm going to stop at this slide just to start with, because one thing in my experience and over the last 18 years of delivering older people's housing is terminology, is we will need to be clear on terminology. So what we are talking about in older people's housing is not care homes. There's an often, and one of the things that's very important at government level, local authority level, is the understanding of the concept of old people's housing and the various pieces of terminology that exist. So extra care housing, assisted living, retirement housing, independent living, all of which are very similar but mean different things to different organizations and to different people. And when we come on to planning and gaining planning consent to deliver older people's housing, the use of terminology is very, very important and can and has led to issues in the past. So older people's housing, extra care, assisted living is very much what we're focusing on here. On the next slide, you can see more than just my head and shoulders. So a little bit about TSA Riley there, and I'll hone in on the shy of 6,000 homes for older people that we've been fortunate and privileged to have delivered over 36 years. And again, that relates to what what I'll refer to as extra care housing and retirement housing across both affordable housing providers of older people's housing, as well as what Lord Best was describing earlier, the higher end independent and integrated retirement communities. Currently, we're involved in 19 schemes delivering older people's housing across the country. We have that covers both planning, pre-construction, and schemes that are currently on site. As far down as Truro, where we have the opening ceremony of a scheme of a 40 unit scheme down in Truro for Housing 21. And we're delivering currently a scheme on site for Anchor up in Bradford. And one of the schemes I'm going to talk you through shortly was a scheme that completed a few years ago now up in Cumbria, which is also another Housing 21 scheme. So I'm going to take us to the next slide and what it takes. So that's what I've been tasked with explaining in the short time that I've got. And I'm going to go actually before I go on through these points. Something that Corinne you mentioned earlier is that really what it takes is for people that have to come together and align before building starts. And that's a very, very pertinent quote, because behind all these blue points here are people. And ultimately, without the people involved, of which there is a small army, then older people's housing quite simply cannot take place in terms of the development and delivery. So I won't go into detail on any of these points because simply we haven't got the time. But hopefully any questions that anyone has, we can address in the breakout room. So land. Clearly, there needs to be the land available to deliver extra care or older people's housing. And that for different organisations, that means different things. But I'll keep it concise and use examples for this part of the presentation, in that for a typical sort of affordable old people's housing scheme, you're looking at around 2 to 3 acres of land. That can be greenfield, brownfield, and by brownfield I mean a kind of existing land that's perhaps been used for something in the past, or it can even mean extending existing schemes. And planning is obviously very, very key. The example I'm going to give in a moment for a scheme up in Cumbria, planning can last years to get planning consent for a scheme. And so going down slightly to stakeholders, both internal and external, is that having the relevant professionals around the table, so planning consultants, construction lawyers, other lawyers, architects, structural engineers, other forms of designers, and the various consultants that are required to deliver an older people's housing scheme. There are many. In my role as a project manager, acting also as in a number of other hats, we signpost to who you need around the table to deliver an older people's housing scheme. Now, the client in this scenario would be the Church of England. Let's take that as the example. So you have the land, then there's obviously the need to secure funding and fund the scheme. And that entails both the funding and the money that's required to pay the various consultants and professionals to get them around the table to ultimately bring the vision to life and to deliver the older people's housing that's required. And the local authority, and it's interesting going back to what Lord Best you said earlier, is that the government don't get it, and that goes all the way down to local authority level as well. And that's not to say that a number of local authorities up and down the country don't get it, but it clearly is a factor in the successful delivery of older people's housing. And planning authorities or planning departments sit within local authorities, and quite simply, schemes can be held up in planning for years. And I have a number, probably equating to not quite maybe thousands of homes that are currently held up in planning up and down the country and are waiting to be delivered in a time where there's a chronic undersupply of housing for older people. So there's there's plenty of opportunity out there, but it can get stalled within planning, which is again where you need the relevant professionals around the table to try and force it through that planning system and ultimately get spades in the ground to deliver this very, very important form of housing. And then an operator, i.e., having someone that knows what they're doing, to be able to pull the team together, to be able to develop, to build, and ultimately to operate the older people's housing once it's built. Housing 21 have been mentioned a few times. We're working with Anchor currently. There's the private IRC operators. So there's many out there that very well know what they're doing to go in and operate these schemes. I've touched on consultants, professionals, and obviously the contractor to build the scheme. Again, very, very important. But the contractor, once you're on site, that's kind of the easy bit generally. It's everything in the lead up to actual spades in the ground that's the challenge. Funding, there's various funding models available with the likes of Anchor and Housing 21. There's an organisation who are the housing arm of the government called Homes England. We're at the start of the new affordable homes programme, for which affordable housing providers, both in the general needs space but also the older people's housing space, can bid to get funding to deliver older people's housing. And to wrap up, that team of people that are around the table have to have the will to deliver. And that's where it's very exciting to meet Karen actually down at Arco probably a few years ago now, which is an annual older people's housing conference. And it just so happened that in the afternoon session, I was sat next to Karen, and who lives all of about 4 miles away from me, and who we got in discussions about this vision, which is a very, very exciting vision. And absolutely, I think with enthusiasm and will, it can happen through the various stakeholders that clearly have to be involved in delivery. So that is a field. That is a vision of a scheme up in Cumbria, which is known as Castlestead View now, which is it comprises 80 apartments, 24 bungalows. On the left, you can see what it looked like before any spades or any investigations were done, before planning permission was sought. And then on the right-hand side, you can see there the aerial view of the completed scheme. So I've just included there the timescales involved. I became involved in the scheme in 2017, but various people within Housing 21 who developed out and now continue to operate the scheme were involved in the site since 2015. It completed in 2022, and then there's something known as defects period afterwards. So that kind of rumbled on for a couple of years while it was making sure the contractor had done what they were supposed to have done. But ultimately, it's providing much needed homes for older people. And I have the privilege of working as and leading the later living team within TSA Riley. And it's a genuine privilege. Social impact that comes about from delivery of these schemes and being able to go back into the schemes and talk to residents about how their lives have been so positively impacted is fantastic. And so there was going to be a video that I will not have time to go into now, but it was a resident called John who now lives at Castlestead View, and he just described his experience of living in independently, but with the on-site care as and when he needs it, and ultimately with his two daughters that have that peace of mind that John is living in comfort and is living a happy life, and who's made friends within the extra care Castlestead View. And that's me done, Gooley. Just over time.
Dan, thank you very much indeed for bringing a little bit of granular detail and clarity, particularly around the importance of terminology and the different elements and stages needed for successfully completing an older people's housing scheme. You weren't able to show your video, but I hope our final guest is going to help. Our final guest is Ian Devereux, and he is someone with lived experience of a retirement community. Ian is currently residing in an extra care community in Herne Bay in Kent, operated by Housing 21. He's a former mechanical engineer, but is passionate in his advocacy for retirement communities to the extent that he's been appointed as the resident member of Housing 21's Extra Care Board Committee. Ian, I hope you're going to tell us what it's like to be a resident in a later living community and how the experience can transform people's lives. Over to you.
Thank you for that very kind introduction. I hope I can live up to uh, the introduction. Um, Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'll be honest with you, when I was invited to speak alongside Lord Best and the other distinguished speakers this evening, my first reaction was, are you sure you've got the right person? I'm not a housing expert, a policy specialist, or a developer. As Gully said, I'm a former engineer from a mining village in Kent, living in an extra care scheme still in Kent. So, to reassure you that I'm not just some random bloke who wandered through the wrong door this evening, as Gully said, I do also sit on Housing 21's Extra Care Committee and I chair the National Residents Forum. So, I work at the heart of Housing 21's residents' engagement activities. So I hope that some of you will find my experience at least a little useful. First, though, a word of warning. When I talk about my experience, I am talking about my personal experience. Everyone's situation is different. There is no one size fits all answer. A lot of what I say would probably resonate with many of my neighbours, but I can't speak for everybody and I wouldn't want to pretend otherwise. So with that caveat out of the way, let's talk about housing for older people and what that means in reality. If you ask social services, they'll tell you their main priority is keeping people in their own homes, supporting independence, preserving comfort, maintaining familiar surroundings. That sounds perfect. It's what we all want after all, until it isn't, and it starts to become isolation, loneliness, decline. Now, I'm not against people staying in their own homes, far from it, but I do think we've developed a slightly unhealthy obsession with it, as though staying put at all costs is automatically the best outcome, and I want to challenge that thought. We are by nature social creatures. Think about your life. When we're young, our community is our family, then school, friends, sports, and for a big chunk of our lives, work. We spend decades building a world around us. But as we get older, that world often starts to shrink. Friends are lost. Family move away. Mobility becomes harder. I wake up every morning wondering what bit we'll eat today. Then gradually, without anyone really noticing, our world can become a much smaller place. So why do we still default to the assumption that keeping an older person in an increasingly empty house, in an increasingly quiet street, is the best possible outcome? For many people, it isn't. And moving into a supported community doesn't just free up their home, it opens up possibilities they'd stopped imagining. When it was first suggested that I could move into an extra care scheme, I assumed the worst. I pictured being tucked away somewhere out of sight and left to watch daytime TV. For someone with an active mind, that's not living. It's a slow anaesthetic to help you pass the time. The thing is that it's not what I found. I found a community of people, people to eat and socialise with, people who notice when you're not quite yourself, people who make life feel like life again. And I'm not alone in saying this. Many of my neighbours would tell you that moving into our scheme literally saved their lives. That's not a figure of speech, they mean it. They had become so isolated with so little to look forward to that they'd quietly given up. Then they joined our community and things changed. One of our residents was asked some time ago what she liked most about living within our scheme. She thought about it for a moment and then said, I've never lived anywhere where I've had so little to worry about. Think about that. That to me says everything. I've seen people arrive with very low expectations and go on to enjoy some of the best years of their lives. That same lady recently celebrated her 103rd birthday. She's still a very active part of our community. Would she have reached 103 in her old home? Perhaps. I don't know. Would she have had the same joy? I doubt it very much. And a personal hate of mine, can we please stop calling it extra care? Because even some professionals only hear the word care. Please let's call it what it really is. It's retirement living. It's independent living. It's supported living. The key word is living, not care. This is why I believe in integrated schemes that matter so much. And I hope they'll matter to you, because after all, one day you might be considering this for either yourself or your loved ones. Right now, we build age-segregated communities, not intentionally perhaps, but effectively. Planners and developers focus on first-time homes, family homes, and general housing needs. Older people's housing gets treated as an awkward footnote or an afterthought. The standard approach seems to be, let's build 2,000 homes. We'll add a school. We need some shops and a bit of green space. And by the way, can we stick a care home in the corner somewhere? Why not put retirement living at the centre of the development? Why not build the schemes with restaurants, lounges, activity rooms and facilities that serve the whole community, not just the people who live inside them? That way, retirement living becomes part of the heartbeat of the community, not a bolt-on, not an afterthought. It's part of the fabric that makes the community. As I mentioned at the beginning, I grew up in a pit village in the 60s, and that's exactly what communities were like. People knew each other and noticed if something was wrong. Over the years, we've lost that community spirit, and I think we've lost something fundamental. Unfortunately, we also know that your postcode may well determine your options. We don't have a national approach to retirement living. We have a postcode lottery. Some regions provide excellent schemes, others provide very little. Some local authorities plan thoughtfully. Others treat older people's housing as an afterthought if they think about it at all. That's not good enough. Older people are not a problem to be managed out of sight. They've been part of their community their whole lives, and they should remain a central part of it. So let me close with this thought. This event is about last-time homes, the homes that older people move into, perhaps for the final chapter of their lives, and that's why it's so important. Because for too long, we've treated that last chapter as though it doesn't really count. As though once someone is past a certain age, the main job is simply to keep them safe and comfortably out of the way. I want to argue, from personal experience, that the last chapter can be one of the best chapters if we get it right and we give people genuine options. That means stopping asking how we keep older people hidden away and starting to ask how we help them stay connected, supported, and included. It means building retirement living that's part of the community, not parked on the edge of it. And finally, it means recognizing that older people are not just an inconvenience. They've spent their lives contributing to their communities, and they still have much to give. If given a chance, older people deserve dignity, they deserve choice, and they deserve the chance not just to live, but to thrive. Thank you for listening, and I hope that was useful to some of you.
Oh, Ian, thank you so much for sharing something of your story and your experiences. And I'm delighted you accepted the invitation to speak, despite some reservations. You've absolutely brought alive for us what happens when a successful scheme comes into being. So thank you very much indeed for being with us. So
It's a
I
pleasure.
hope those of you listening will agree that we've heard an inspiring and enriching set of presentations. And you now have an opportunity to join a breakout group with one of the speakers to ask any questions you have or to explore their presentation in a little more detail. We've got till around about 7 for the breakout groups. And in a moment, a window is going to pop up for you to choose one of the 4 groups to join. You can't, unfortunately, move around between the groups. But we will hear a very short summary from each of the groups when we come back. And someone from the Archbishop's Council Housing Project is going to be moderating each group. I'm very grateful to them. And they will welcome you there shortly, together with each of those who have led a presentation. So I'll see you here back in the plenary session at around 7:10. Well, welcome back. I hope we've got all the groups back in now. And I hope that you've had enough time to ask at least some of your questions and to dig a little bit deeper into the topic of your group. I'm now going to invite each of the moderators to summarize very briefly, if possible, the discussion from your breakout group. So this is literally a couple of minutes each, and you've seen what a hard taskmaster Jonathan is. So a couple of minutes each, please. Starting with group number 1, which was Richard, and hopefully a summary offered by Tash.
Thank you very much. We had a really interesting discussion in group 1, which centered mostly around older people's motivations to either stay in their homes or move to intergenerational living, supported housing, or retirement living. We talked about challenging the idea that an Englishman's home is his castle, and sort of what motivates people to want to move, whether it's a push factor, that eventually somebody's house becomes unmanageable, or whether seeing what could be on offer for decent, exciting and viable retirement living places can be a pull factor, and perhaps seeing those things rather than just sort of being told about them would help with that. We also talked about cultural differences around the idea of renting or downsizing in other countries around the world, as opposed to sort of the English perhaps mindset of staying in your castle and staying in your fortress. But yeah, it was a really interesting discussion.
Thank you very much indeed, Tash. Moving on to group 2, this was Karen's group, and Becky's going to offer a summary.
Thank you, Bishop Gully. We started off with Karen being asked to outline exactly how did it start, what did she do, and that was a lovely explanation where she also described how there's a lack of middle ground. What was the reason for starting it as well was the middle ground. So there's quite a lot of high-end retirement community housing, and there is a social housing option as well within that spectrum. But there seemed to be a middle ground missing for people who were in a lower price bracket but could perhaps afford their own home. So that's something they started thinking about. They did a lot of research, and interestingly, the conversation then went on to talk about different experiences, mentioning experience in Germany, but then one of the other group participants mentioned their own personal experience of retirement living in Japan, and how they had a tuck shop and a space where children could go and do homework, knowing that there were staff around and volunteers. So just some lovely examples of what's happening in other parts of the world that were reflected on by Karen, but also then the group in the breakout room. We was also spoke about the unit size and viability. How do we get this right? Small schemes can be more tricky in terms of finances. And Karen talked about how by sharing the communal spaces with the schools, and also by possibly having less of a less high-end care package within place, you can make costs stack up a little better. And then we finished with talking about partnerships, and how Karen described how post-COVID it's maybe better opportunity now for partners to work with the church and try find new opportunities. And yeah, that was a positive note that we ended on.
Thank you very much indeed, Becky. I'm sure there's loads we've still got to learn from other countries and the models that they operate. Let's move to group 3. This was Dan's group and a summary offered by Faye.
Hi, yeah, we had a really interesting, fascinating discussion, lots of questions. We talked about, from an architectural point of view, the possibility of internal and external corridors and how common the differences between those and what decide those. And um, Dan talked about how when community facilities are also on site, whether they might be attached primary schools or something, that often answers the corridor question. We had interesting discussions about planning use class. And whether there was or could be or should be a separate planning use class for anything to do with intergenerational developments, largely focused on the fact that that might aid some of the funding routes and make things that flow a little bit more easier. And we then had a question about primary schools no longer in use, church primary schools, and whether there was any possibility there, because we'd already acknowledged the link between schools and intergenerational and joining those things. And in this particular diocese, there were a number of primary schools that were at sites that were no longer in use as schools. And Dan gave some examples where perhaps rather than develop those particular sites because market value might have to be obtained, selling those and then using the funds from those to fund developments which may include community and worship spaces. And so we explored that kind of altogether. And then lastly, that kind of led into a conversation about funding generally and where the funding challenges were, where the opportunities were. Dan gave some great examples about being creative and how Homes England can work alongside the local authority funding. So that was where we ended up.
Thank you very much indeed, Faye. Really helpful. And finally, group 4, this was Ian's group and a summary offered by Jonathan.
All right. Thank you. I'm just making sure I got this right. So, yeah, we had a really interesting small group where we talked about the experience. Obviously, different things resonated with what Ian had shared. One of the big questions is, why is it so difficult to persuade people to leave their own homes and to come and enter a community like this? And Ian was really saying, we've got to somehow crack the marketing of it. We're just not, there's some fantastic stories, such as the ones you shared, but not enough people are hearing them. So talked about that. A couple of people were involved in community-led housing, and they were saying that, yes, this creating intergenerational meeting places is really key. And there's different ways of doing that, but one of the most important, Ian said, was the restaurant. So people meet most naturally over food. So taking the time and making the effort to ensure there's somewhere to come together over food is a really key part of I suppose, facilitating the relationships which are at the heart of these communities, these intergenerational communities. We also talked about how we need to see the church taking more of a lead, the church commissioners. It would be great if they took a lead on the big housing developments which they are able to bring forward on some of their larger sites. So perhaps, can we within the church do more to sort of spread this story? And then we also mentioned at the end about the difficulty that some retirement living operators are having to sell on, well, once people die and they need to sell on their flats, it can be quite difficult. So there's perhaps some adjustments to be made there. But Ian was saying that the rental option is obviously the easiest one to be able to just move from one tenant to the next. So those are some of the things we covered.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I mean, a very wide range of topics covered in the different groups, and I hope those of you who joined the groups have found that helpful. So the final part of this evening is going to give us an opportunity to hear some concluding remarks and reflections from Bishop Eleanor Sanderson. Bishop Eleanor is originally, I think I'm right in saying, from Derbyshire, but she spent over 20 years in New Zealand, where she was ordained. And later became an assistant bishop in the Diocese of Wellington, where she was involved in setting up a really innovative church housing program. So she's returned to England in 2022 with a huge amount of experience under her belt in all kinds of areas, but including housing. And she was appointed in 2022 as the Bishop of Hull in the Diocese of York. Bishop Eleanor is also now the Deputy Bishop for Housing. I'm very, very grateful to you, Bishop Eleanor, for being here with us this evening, and really look forward to hearing what reflections you have after listening to the webinar this evening.
Oh, thank you, Bishop Gully, and it's been a real privilege to listen deeply and to be taking notes and bringing together the different themes of tonight, alongside having kind of been praying for this moment as well throughout this week. And I think the thing that I wanted to begin with is the sense of celebrating the real richness of the conversations that we've had and the richness in the scales that we've spoken of, from the very personal to the deeply political, and how they're all integrated within each other, and how between us all, the collaboration that we have with one another can impact at all of those scales, the deeply personal as well as the profoundly political. And so the biggest theme that I want to pull out is that of hope. And I think that the hope that we have in having this conversation at the different levels that we have is a testament to the realization of the hope that is within us. And as I've been thinking of us in this meeting tonight, in this week, was aware, as Bishop Gooley said at the beginning, that we're in these final days of Eastertide before we celebrate Ascension. And in Jesus's narratives and conversations with the disciples, he's always preparing them for what is ahead and preparing them for the incredible responsibility and kind of freedom, in a sense, that they have in him to be part of the kingdom coming on earth as it is in heaven. And one of the things that Jesus says that I find probably most hopeful and most reassuring is when in John's Gospel in John 14, Jesus is having a conversation about going ahead into the Father's house to prepare a room for us. And I think for me, there's a very kind of human part of me that just feels enormously reassured that there is a physical place. And I know that we can understand that scripture in a range of ways in terms of its interpretation. But I think for all of us, particularly if we've experienced vulnerability in terms of housing, vulnerability in terms of resources, the thought of Jesus preparing a place for us is profoundly helpful. And I was reflecting on Ian as your friend said that in being in this new community, she had so little to worry about. And to think that Jesus is preparing a place makes me alleviated of worry, because there's that sense of trust. And so there was two things that I wanted to share from that I think have come out of tonight. The first is to really honour each other and to honour the endeavour that we're sharing in together tonight. That we are really trying to prepare good places for people, and that there's enormous wisdom in what a good place is, and that we don't have to be limited by what we may have experienced, but actually we can make the impossible possible, as was said in our breakout room. And tonight, I think that there is this sense of what might seem impossible becoming more possible. So I want to kind of honour each other and honour that shared endeavour to prepare good places for people in the same way as Jesus seeks to prepare good places for people. And then the second is to share an experience that I had with you from many years ago. And it's quite a personal experience, but it felt really relevant to share tonight. And then after all we've heard, I thought I really do want to share it with you. it was a dream that I had, a literal dream one night, and I was trying to remember quite when it was, but it was between sort of 15 and 18 years ago, so a very, very long time ago. And it was what I would kind of sense a spiritual dream. It didn't come from a wondering of mine. It was kind of an out of the blue dream that I had one night. And in this dream, I was entering into a house, and it was Jesus's house, and he was showing it to me, and it was a genuine intergenerational house. There was different floors and different places that were designed specifically for the needs of different types of generations. And the bit that stood out for me at the time was the kind of children's area, because I had young children at the time, where it was kind of a combination of a soft play and part within a kind of whole floor, and slides and stairs and like a jungle gym that was literally built in the house. And every different part of this house was perfectly amazing and beautiful for the different generations. But as I kind of got, at the end of the dream, I was just overwhelmed by this sense of how possible this was, that there was nothing there that was difficult to build. I'd just never ever seen a building like this that was designed for all the generations. And at the end, Jesus looked at me and he handed me the keys, and there was a sense of saying, "Yeah, I've built this for you." So that was a very, very, very long time ago, but that put into my mind the possibility, the hope of intergenerational living. So I've kind of carried that within me for a very long time. And I do hope that one day those houses can be built, because there really is nothing architecturally difficult about building those types of houses. So I share that with you today. And one of the quotes, again, that I wanted to just end with that came from our conversations was the opposite of age segregated community. And that dream was certainly the opposite of age segregated community. And so, in closing, do want to just honour us all for this shared endeavour, which seems very, very familiar to Jesus's desire to go ahead and prepare a place for those that he loves. So, thank you.
Eleanor, thank you so much, especially for sharing so personally and just reminding us that actually this should be fairly simple. We like to make complex work of things that ought to be simple. So you've left us with a sense of hopefulness. I know that the work of housing, even the little bit of experience I've had, how slow it can be and how wearisome and even leave people disillusioned. But you've left us with a real sense of hopefulness and a reminder that the impossible can become possible. And we've heard some of the examples of that from other speakers as well this evening. So thank you to you. Thank you to our other guest speakers. And indeed, thanks to all of you who've joined us and have given up your Monday evening, or at least part of it. I hope you've got good things planned for the rest of it. But it's been good that you've joined this church housing event. I hope that you found it helpful and stimulating. You should get an email tomorrow with a link to the recording of tonight's session. Do share that if you want with others, and we'll write again once we've got details of next term's event. But for now, thank you again to Jonathan for making this evening possible with all the organisation that's gone into it. God bless, and do enjoy the rest of your evening.